So my name is Frezer. I'm an advisor at the Ethiopian Embassy working on cultural issues.
Okay, great. Could you just tell us a little bit about Magdala, the battle, the historical context to what we're doing today?
Sure. The Battle of Magdala, it's been said many times, is kind of a scar on the collective consciousness of Ethiopians. It was probably the first moment in which an external aggressor arrived into Ethiopia, and that led to the kind of death or deposing of a leader. What makes it, I think, extra bitter for Ethiopians is the fact that the leader of the day, Emperor Theodros II, was largely seen as kind of a savior, a messianic figure who had come to power following a century or so of utter turmoil. And that was very much looking forward to a time when Ethiopia would recapture its place as one of the great civilizations in the world. And Emperor Theodros was working to that end. And I think Magdala arrived exactly at the time when essentially he was getting rolling. And ultimately, his vision and mission didn't work out. And then we were in a bit of turmoil again for a few more years until Emperor Minilik. So for Ethiopians, it has that, it kind of has that, it's a breaking point in the historical account where people feel like, yeah, it was a missed opportunity at a time of national reckoning.
Maybe you could just mention a few of the objects here and tell us a bit about what they are and their history.
I mean, you really have a mix of objects. You have the crown that would have belonged to a senior member of the clergy, that would have been ceremonial. You have the shield, very impressive, probably largely decorative. I don't think a warrior would have walked into battle holding that. You have a scroll here, which seems like it's maybe magical in nature, but also has some religion and spirituality mixed in with it, which is common. And that scroll would have been usually rolled up and held in what they call a kitab, which is kind of a special amulet that you would hold on your person, and that would protect you from coming to harm. And then the other interesting objects, I think, are the cups, the horn cups, which were taken at Magdala and then refashioned in the UK. I think that's a nice way of showing how these objects have a life of themselves, actually, beyond just the cultures that produced them. And then lastly, I really like the Bible with the satchel and also the cross, because to me, that's probably one of the few objects in there which connects you directly with the common person. That Bible isn't royal. It's not something that you'd see within the clergy. It's a personal Bible. It belongs to someone in and around Magdala who happened to fall victim to war, which usually has that collateral damage. So I think that's a nice connection with the average person that is usually forgotten in the kind of big man conflicts of Magdala.
Maybe you could just give us a sense of what today's event could mean to Ethiopia and Ethiopians in general.
It's, as I said, Magdala does occupy this very special place in Ethiopian hearts. And what's interesting about the battle itself is not so much what happened. Everyone knows the pain of what happened. But I think it's also what it led to in terms of the impact on Ethiopian psychology. And when you look forward from Magdala and you look at something like 1896, the Battle of Adwa, the attempt by the Italians to colonize and subjugate Ethiopia, what's the most interesting thing about that is that the emperor basically, he produced a call to the nation to rally around and to come in support and to fight at this battle. The answer to that call was unprecedented in Ethiopian history. People from across the nation at a time without mobile phones, without transport, rallied themselves up. Women cooked meals and helped the soldiers along there, or the militias at the time. And everyone arrived at Adwa prepared to do their service for their nation. I think that has a direct correlation to what happened at Magdala. Then when you look even further forward, during the time of the Second World War and Mussolini's attempt to occupy Ethiopia, stories I was told as a child was that the first thing that many elders did in villages, towns, and cities across Ethiopia was they identified relics that they would hide. And again, when you look at Magdala in terms of its legacy of looting, and that's why we're here today, these objects would still be in Ethiopia had it not been for that. You can see how the psychology of Ethiopians, they understood externally motivated conflicts as part of a process of looting and dispossession, not just of their country or their identities, but also of their artifacts and the ingenuity of the culture that produced it. So, you tie Magdala back to all these things, and it just goes to show it was a seminal moment in the history of the country, and Ethiopians still carry that with them today.
Do you think this small act of restitution here, can this go some way to healing some of those wounds, building bridges between Britain and Ethiopia?
Definitely. I think, the motto of the Scheherazade Foundation is to bridge cultures, and I think this is exactly what this is doing. I think in many senses, when you read the historical accounts, the understanding of what Magdala was to Brits and what it was to Ethiopians is very different, almost polar opposites. At a time it was the exploration age, and it was all about adventure and expedition abroad. And, probably for many of the soldiers, it was probably represented some of the most interesting times in their lives. Now, when you juxtapose that with how the person in Magdala who lived there, had their families there, felt, it's completely the opposite. So I think events like this, where you can connect people to that history through physical objects, allow you to then begin to understand the nuances of the experience on either side. And I think that's really important in a world now where we're even more connected than ever, but somehow feel even more disconnected than ever, to find ways to allow cultures to speak to each other.
Are you hopeful that other Magdala objects might be repatriated?
Yeah, I think, this is, there's been campaigns to repatriate Magdala era heritage since, 1869. The emperor who succeeded Emperor Theodorus, Emperor Johannes, one of his first acts in office was to say, hey Brits, can you please return some of these documents? I need them for taxation and property. And when you look at it in that sense, it's not just a campaign that started yesterday. We didn't start it. There are 4 bearers to this work. And I think this is just another milestone on that journey. And what makes this one even more interesting is that it's not state-led. This is a civil society initiated, proposal or project which has found its fruition in today's event. So I think that can be an example for other foundations such as Scheherazade, but also for members of the Ethiopian diaspora across the world to look at the countries they live in, understand how their homeland connects to those countries, and in situations where there are these kind of objects that have been brazenly looted or taken illegally, still find ways to return those to the people who created them.